Welcome back to the podcast. I'm joined by Stuart and Anita, who I met on my cycle tour, and they're going to tell me a little bit about what it's like to do cycle touring as a family.
Hi. Should we just start telling you about ourselves?
Well, yeah, we can. It's very surreal. This is actually the first time I've done it with video. I guess people listening at home won't know. So it makes it change. But these are two lovely people I stayed with, and I guess we'll just go over the tour again. Sort of, we can share some stories with people, and then we'll get into more of the stuff we talk about with family. That'd be really nice. So tell us kind of a brief overview of the tour and some stuff that stood out.
Sure.
Okay.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I guess sometimes when we say that we did a big bike tour, people often say, well, what made you do that? Were you cyclists before? And, I think the story that we often sort of tell is actually, no, neither of us were really into cycling except for, I guess, commuting to work and things in London.
Yeah, I would say we cycled a lot, but weren't, it was a means to an end.
Yeah.
And in many ways, the bike tour was a means to an end as well. We wanted to travel a bit before settling down and having a family.
But we were a bit old.
We were a bit old. We're a bit old for backpacking in the traditional sense, but wanted a challenge and an adventure and a cheap way of doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, doing it by bicycle was a way to meet those kind of requirements, I suppose, more than doing it for the sake of cycling.
Yeah, and we were able to leave our home without flying anywhere, with all of the things that we needed with us.
Yep.
So we did originally plan to go for about a year, leaving our house in Sussex and traveling east, I guess, was our initial plan.
Well, there were a few plans. I mean, we were pretty loosey-goosey and open-ended about what we were going to do. I thought when we left, this is our differing memories. I thought certainly one of the things we were looking at was doing a year-long loop around Europe, like heading east, but then south and kind of overwintering in southern Europe and coming back up the west coasts of Europe.
I'd secretly got it in my head that we were cycling all the way to China.
Oh, right. I was maybe. Well, neither of those things happened.
No.
We cycled across Europe to Turkey ultimately, and then flew to India and cycled up the west coast of India. So kind of two separate chunks joined together. So that was the extent of our tour, and we were away for about 6 months in total. And I mean, we took it pretty easy in terms of mileage, and there were quite a few breaks where we stayed at places for a few days or a week or two here and there to break it up. But that was the summary of what we ended up doing by accident, cycling across Europe to Turkey and then a bit of India.
So, I mean, with those two parts, was that kind of just as you went along, you made those decisions?
I think so. Certainly the India bit was. So there were two factors. One, like Anita said, we were originally planning to travel for a year, but several months into the tour, there was a work incentive to come home at Christmas, basically, and to take up some work offers. So that made us decide to knock it on the head at 6 months. I think otherwise we would have cheerfully carried on for a full year. And then in terms of where we were going, it was pretty fluid. We were just seeing how things went as we went along.
And we had different friends, I guess, at different points in Europe that we had sort of aimed to go and say hello to. So there was someone in the Netherlands. So we sort of cycled east and said hello to them and stayed there a couple of nights. Someone in Germany, actually two people in Germany. So we ended up kind of veering a little bit more north than we would have going to Berlin. And it was actually when we were in Berlin that our friend there invited us to her wedding in Calcutta. And originally we were sort of like, well, we can't do that. We're cycling for a year and that's not going to happen. But I guess as we went along, we kept thinking, well, is that possible? Could we take the bikes? Could we go and cycle in India?
Yeah. So over a period of a few weeks or a month or so, we figured out what the logistics could be and that we could change our plans and go to India for the second half of it. So that's what we did. We started sort of rerouting ourselves, working out that we'd get to Istanbul and then stop there and then fly from there to India. And the wedding was in Calcutta, so that was the main motivation for going to India. But we decided to cycle up the west coast of India, not anywhere near Calcutta, because the research we did, it just looked the best and the easiest kind of cycling and the best options. So we did that, and then took a very long train ride across country to actually go to the wedding, and that was kind of how we finished the whole thing in Calcutta for a week.
Yeah, and actually, India was pretty amazing. We actually sort of cycled from the southernmost tip in Kanyakumari all the way up to Goa. And a lot of people are kind of surprised, or I guess cycle touring in Europe, especially kind of around the Netherlands and things, is much more common. But actually going to India is much more unusual. And while we were in India, we didn't see any other cycle tourists apart from that one group of people who were on a kind of organized tour of a few days, but they weren't loaded tourists. So
yeah, I feel like there's two things. There's short sort of local cycle touring, and then there's world cycle tourists. And even the world cycle tourists tend to have a kind of a beaten path. And we didn't find a huge amount of information about cycle touring in India. So we were definitely winging it a bit. But it was great. I mean, it was good cycling, felt pretty safe, and obviously, I mean, anyone who's done any sort of traveling and touring in that sort of sense will tell you that people all over the world are just super, super nice and friendly. And we could talk for hours and hours about the wonderful people that we met, which is really what cycle touring is about. Like we say, it's a means to an end. It's a good way of traveling a kind of interesting distance in one day. You can travel far enough that you've sort of, in some instances, crossed a whole country or a significant chunk of a country, but you're going slow enough that you can stop and speak to everyone along the way. I'm sure you experience the same thing, Josh, that when it's everyone can see you and speak to you and hear you, and you're not going on you're not going via bus stations or airports or train stations. You're going through the heart of communities at a speed where you can put your brakes on and put your foot down and stop and have a chat to someone. And it's a really sort of deeply connected way of traveling through communities of the world. I think it's we're totally addicted to it in some ways. Once you've done it once, it's it can be quite transformative.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I wonder what is the difference. Obviously, I've done some stuff in England, some very small stuff. What's it like out in India? Or what's comparing it to Europe? What kind of experience? Like, tell me a few of these experiences meeting people. I'd love to know.
So I guess it's making me think. Across Europe, we did a lot of couch surfing and warm showers and staying with people. We didn't stop that when we went to India. In fact, we purposefully tried to set up couch surfing, and we sent our tents and camping equipment back when we were in Istanbul. But the difference for me when we couch surfed with people in India is they didn't want you to leave. Their hospitality was unending. So we ended up staying with one family for a week, and then we went off and did a bit of touring and came back and stayed with them for another week.
I mean, my feeling generally is that the further away we got from the UK, the friendlier people got, which sounds awful because they're obviously nice people in the UK and in Northwest Europe. But through Eastern Europe and then into Turkey, the sort of scope of hospitality and generosity, it seemed to increase exponentially. That might have been partly because of our own confidence at asking for help and sort of connecting to people. I think that's a skill that you kind of have to learn traveling. But in India was the same, and people in some places with very, very little in terms of wealth or worldly possessions offering quite breathtaking hospitality. I mean, the one that sticks in my mind is it must have been on the way down to Kanyakumari. Or no, did we? I can't remember the exact route now, but we were going down the coast, and it was clearly a place where, in that part of India, in Kerala and Goa, there's some quite well known and very touristy beach resorts, and then in between those beach resorts dotted down the coast are just stretches of quite open countryside and very rural and poor communities. And the tourists in general, I think it's fair to say in India, hop between beach resorts and sort of transport hubs. And I think it's pretty rare to see tourists away from any of those two places. So we were obviously cycling the whole lot. And like I said earlier, going through the heart of these communities. And we we were cycling along a fairly quiet road, well away from tourist spots, and there was a little tea shack shop by the side of the road. So naturally, we stopped for tea at more or less any opportunity, and it was obviously an unusual occurrence because there was no one there to start with. And then within a couple of minutes, the whole village seemed to have emerged from nowhere. Clearly, it was an interesting enough and unusual enough occurrence for some foreign tourists to be stopping by for a cup of tea. And without the ability to communicate in English or in Hindi, everyone was just being super friendly and supportive. And eventually one guy was like beckoning us and telling us to come with him. And we did. Again, having a lot of experience of travel, your trust increases exponentially in people as well. I think at home and in normal life, we're always quite wary and cautious and anxious about, I don't know, people being over friendly, and I think you get very cynical and jaded very quickly in the normal world, but somehow traveling pushes you out of that. So it didn't seem like an unusual thing for someone to be luring us and beckoning us to follow him. We walked through a bit of jungle to a tiny little sort of cluster of houses, and he showed us a coir mat factory where they were making mats from coconut coir, and which I think was owned by his brother, maybe. Took us into his brother's house, gave us a drink.
He climbed a tree and got down a coconut and some tamarind, and he just there was no ulterior motive, which is what you're trying to get at. Like he wanted to share these things with us.
He wanted us to understand his life, but the whole thing was non-verbal. There was no spoken language communication, but it was really obvious what was going on. And then he took us further after that to his house, which was right on the beach, really in some ways idyllic setting, but not much more than a shack. And his wife was there and daughter.
And she had just clearly cooked their main meal for the day.
And his mother, who seemed quite poorly, I would say, on a bed in the back, like it was a 2-room shack basically. And he more or less forced us to eat his lunch, which we felt uncomfortable doing, but also didn't want to seem rude. And I don't know, like there was just this desire, I think, for him to share his life with us for some reason. And I don't know, it was a good, deeply moving experience in some ways. Like there was incredibly humble and simple existence that those guys had. We don't know their names. I don't think we could communicate anything. I'm not even sure their house had an address that you could write to, for example. They weren't trying to extort money from us. There was no hint of any want of anything when it was time to finally leave. It was just this sort of personal connection and sharing of their lives. Really interesting. So
it's a very kind of like UK mentality when you're sort of thinking, what are they trying to get at? I mean, I think that's kind of a bit hardwired a lot of the time when you're kind of like, what do they want from this situation? And it's nice when it's just like, just kindness in its purest form, really. So we had this, what sounds like a fantastic cycle tour and a bit of a ferry book ending, kind of coming through India and having this big wedding to finish. What happened after that? What was the next step?
Normal life proceeded to take place. I mean, so that whole tour was partly sort of a break between young adulthood and settling down. Yeah, it was partly a break between young adulthood and settling down to start a family and buy a house and do grown-up stuff. So after that tour, nothing. When did we get back on the bikes again after that? I mean, what even happened? 2012?
Oh no, we did. We cycled to Paris.
Oh yeah, we did the London-Paris cycle route 1 September for a couple of weeks. Nothing big really after that.
No.
We just carried on with our careers, saving up for a deposit on a house, trying to start a family. And then our twins were born in 2015, which occupied us and kind of ruled out any exciting travel for a period of time until 2019. So they were 4 at the time. And when we finally kind of thought, we could figure out the logistics of how to cycle tour with kids now. With we've met lots of interesting cyclists over the years through couch surfing and warm showers, both when we were cycling ourselves, but that's one way that we sort of continued to experience a bit of the world vicariously through other people. We've been quite proactive hosts over the years, both when we used to live in Lewis and now in St Leonard's and Hastings, mostly through warm showers these days, but also a bit of couch surfing before. And have met a few with kids, and I think that made us realise that it was doable.
Actually, when they were 2 in 2018, we did a really small 3-day tour up the Cuckoo Trail. So we just we cycled for 1 day, stayed in a campsite for 2 nights and cycled back again.
Yep.
And I just remember getting back on the bikes and cycling down the hill out of our house, and both of us just looking at each other and just reconnecting with that sense of freedom that we had on our cycle tour. And although the kids were behind us at that point, because they were only 2, they were in little bucket seats on the back of our bikes and we were towing the trailer. Just reconnecting with that sense of freedom and just knowing that we were going to use our own power to get to our destination was a real quite amazing feeling. And so actually when we did the 2019 tour, there would only have been 3.
No, they were, you're right, they weren't quite 4. So a year and a half ago was our sort of first foray into what I would call proper cycle touring with kids, and I think it'll become a regular part of our lifestyle, our summers now. It's like I said before, we're sort of addicted to it. It's a hugely satisfying way to travel, and hopefully the kids will love it. They certainly love camping, and they're getting on well with their bikes around the park and along the seafront here. So hopefully it'll be a big part of our lives for a long time to come.
Well, and apart from that kind of emotional connection that I think we have with it, and we've actually kind of, I guess, done a bit of a kind of practical, logistical look at actually what you spend on family holidays. Each year, a family of 4 can spend quite a lot of money, and we worked out that if we take a similar amount of money and invest it in our gear and our equipment, which we've done a bit of already, and then pay for campsites, and actually, we can do a family holiday more affordably that way. So there's also a slightly kind of, practical side to it as well.
Yeah, the difference with touring with kids was that we were just a lot more organised about everything, pre-booking campsites and knowing what our routes were every day, rather than when we were cycling on our own, being fancy free and footloose and wild camping if we needed to, and
people inviting us to stay, and
random last minute invites, and it does change the mindset that you have to have, I think. But so hopefully we'll be out on the road again somewhere this summer.
So we talked a little bit about the tour already, like before the podcast, but tell me a bit more about it again. And what interests me is, you talk about these experiences you had during the tour. What do you hope that the kids will get out of it?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, they love camping and being outside. I find them easiest to manage when they're kind of outside and in nature. It feels just inherently good for them. So being physically active and spending time outside, that's a core part of what we believe in terms of our parenting strategy. And so it fits nicely with that.
Yeah, I think there's also something about not having to be occupied every minute of the day. And often when we talk about the 2019 tour that we did, so we went from Hastings, East Sussex, to Margate and kind of back round again. So it was 9 days in total. I think parents are sort of wondering, well, what did the kids do for that whole time? And there was something kind of important about not having to, take things or to occupy them, that actually they are sitting and observing and, paying attention to their surroundings.
Yeah, which change all the time anyway. And then you stop in the next town or at an ice cream shop that you happen to bike past. And in many ways, it was pretty easy in that sense. I think once you've got the logistics and the timings and the distances works out, I didn't find it particularly challenging to occupy them. I think think they were in their element and they loved it. Yeah, it works really well with camping and just being an outdoor active kind of lifestyle, which is what we aspire to.
And so I guess for the 2019 tour, because there were only 3, they weren't cycling. So we talked a bit before about the kind of setup, and just to say again, so we had one in a 2-person trailer, and that one could sleep if they wanted, because that's pretty secure and comfortable. And we had the other one in something called a weehoo, which is a bit like a tag-along recumbent. So they're strapped in a 5-point harness and they can cycle, but they're quite low to the ground. It's completely open. And so I guess the child that's in that is much more connected. And
I mean, it's a fun experience, the weehoo.
Yeah.
You can bez it pretty fast and go over bumps and stuff, and like it's quite a fun thing for a kid, I reckon.
So I guess for that tour, they weren't as physically engaged. But when we're thinking about what we're moving to, now they can both cycle bikes independently. And they have been for well over 6 months or 9 months now. So they're pretty confident on their bikes. It's just whether they can do the distances. So now we're at this point where, do we enable them to cycle some of the next tour that we do, or are we going to have to kind of have a setup where they're a bit safer and a bit more secure?
Yeah, there's an appeal to using the weehoos because we can cover the distances that we want to, which are not Olympic by any stretch of the imagination. They're very comfortable, sort of 30-40 kilometers a day average, and yeah, there is an appeal to using weehoos. It feels a lot easier, but the cycling on a bike, tag along, tandem things, that would be good for them, I think, and for their independence. So we haven't figured out what the future looks like yet in terms of our gear setup, but it will have to change every few years anyway.
And I guess, in the current kind of situation, COVID has, I guess, shrunk everyone's world a little bit, and our ability perhaps to access other countries and other places isn't necessarily going to be as easy. I guess Brexit's also had an impact on that. So, I guess I'm really keen to explore more of the UK, or we've sort of talked about maybe going to the Netherlands or places that we are able to access a bit more easily from where we live.
Yeah, one of the challenges of cycling with kids is having 2 adults and 2 adult bikes and camping kit and gear, then also 2 other types of bikes or trailers for kids and all of their gear. And there's a lot of stuff to get, for example, on a train. It's doable to get on a train, but quite highly stressful.
I was about to say it's impossible. But...
Well, it feels impossible in the UK. I got some advice once from a family cycle touring person who said, you just need to split up. Don't go as 2 adults and 2 kids. Go as 1 adult and 1 kid, and then another one as 1 adult and 1 kid on the next train, because people will help you then if you look like you're single and struggling. I thought that was a good bit of advice that we might well end up using. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you hope you're gonna do a loop then, or will you have to travel by train?
I think if we go to the Netherlands, we'll have to do a combination. I think we'll have to take the car and then the ferry, and then probably a train at some point in the Netherlands as well. Accessing trains in Europe does not faze me particularly because they're so much better set up for cycling, especially in the Netherlands. Driving up to Harwich for the ferry, yeah, it's fine, provided we figure out a way to get all of our bikes onto roofs and stuff like that. But yeah, I think in Europe we didn't take any trains or anything in Europe when we cycled on our own pre-kids. We just biked the whole way. But in India, we did put our bikes on a train on 2 occasions, including the bit where we went from Goa to Calcutta. And that was pretty sketchy. Like, the guys just take your bikes and like throw them into a luggage carriage, and you're like, my bike that's done however many thousands of kilometers with me. And
I need it at the other end.
And I also need it to work at the other end. But we've got horrible beefy old steel touring bikes that are pretty indestructible. So they were fine. But you wouldn't be able to do that with, for
Mm.
example, 2 kids and 2 extra bikes. That would be impossible.
Mm.
But yeah, Netherlands, I reckon, will be okay.
Well, I mean, so I've never actually been, but it's meant to be like some wonderful like networks that they built, right?
Yeah, the bits that we cycled
Oh,
through on our
yeah.
tour in 2012 were amazing. They've got a very clever numbering system for getting around local bike routes, and it's basically flat. And yeah,
Well,
it's
my recollection is that it was almost completely off road. That where there was a cycle route,
yeah.
it was a cycle route which was almost as large as a road often.
Yeah. The whole country is covered
But that
by
was just for
proper.
bikes. You know, it was so safe.
Yeah, that's one of the things that appeals about taking kids there for a tour, is that it's going to be as safe as it could possibly be, pretty physically undemanding, and just really well set up for cyclists.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we're kind of getting to the half an hour mark. So this is kind of the opportunity. If there's any last little stories or little tidbits of advice on life and cycle touring that you wanna throw in there before we finish, I think this is a good chance.
We better not get stuck into too many stories from our 2012.
Oh, I was about to get stuck
oh,
into
go
some
on, do something
stories
quick
from
then.
our 20. I guess maybe one bit of advice I would say is, or advice I would have given myself when we went on our tour, was perhaps to be less afraid. I think, like Stuart said, we grew in confidence. But I still remember being a bit reserved English, you know, worried to ask people things. And actually, you know, we had our setup. We could have wild camped probably a bit more. We could have definitely stayed in people's gardens a bit more. And I think probably me now would be a bit more bold and a bit more confident, because those times when we did, and often those times were perhaps a little out of desperation, or you know, there's one story which is one of my favorite experiences of complete altruism and kindness, was in Austria. We were about to cross over the border into Slovakia. We needed to stay for the night, and we'd been told there was this park where you could camp, and we went to this park, but it was full of youths, and we were obviously a bit afraid
teenagers.
of youths. And so we cycled into the town, and I said to Stuart, look, I'm just going to ask the first person that I see if we can stay in their garden or if they know anywhere. And we stopped this group of old ladies, and one of them did speak some English. And so she said, come to my friend's house. You can probably camp in her garden. And then it turns out that her friend had an orchard, and they said, look, follow our car, drive up this hill, and we'll take you to our orchard. So we followed them up this hill to this beautiful fruit orchard, and they were going to let us pitch our tent. But in the fruit orchard, they actually had this gorgeous shed with a veranda. So it was more like a cabin.
Shed is underselling it. It's like a summer house.
It was a summer house. And they said, don't bother putting your tent up. Just put your roll mats inside here. You know, it's warmer and you can stay in here. And then they opened this little kind of cubby hole in the floor that was almost like a cellar, and they got out a bottle of wine and sat and had a bottle of wine with us. And then they said to us, look, will you have breakfast? Can we bring some breakfast for you in the morning?
What they actually said was, do you have tea or coffee? And we said, no, we're fine. We've got everything we need. So, you know, we'll just pack up.
Don't worry about us.
Out of here by 7.
You won't know we've
and
been here.
They insisted on it. And the next morning,
it wasn't even the women that we were talking to. It was one of their daughters.
Yeah.
And I think one of their mothers.
Yeah.
Turned up with 2 hampers with tea and coffee.
Yeah.
They had cheese and the whole continental spread, pastries. They picked fresh fruit from their orchards, and anything that we didn't eat for breakfast, they insisted that we took with us. And we just sat and had this breakfast with them and chatted. I think the daughter was a teacher, and I think they gave us little badges, little pins of the like emblem of the town or that we were in. And
and well, like you say, I mean, that was phenomenal hospitality and kindness, and just for a couple of cyclists who looked like they were a bit weary and needed somewhere to sleep, and they went way above and beyond and were so kind and generous. But like Anita says, that's one of dozens and dozens of stories that we could pick of similar encounters and experiences of people just being kind and helpful. And that's the single best thing about cycling and our cycling experience. We also met other cycle tourists from around the world on the road who had exactly the same experiences. That, you know, I don't think we met anyone who'd ever faced any hostility or any real danger. but everyone had countless stories of kindness and hospitality and support. And I think anyone who's travelled will probably have a similar experience, but cycle touring in particular is a good way to go get those experiences, and it definitely makes you feel a lot more positive about humanity. If you're a bit cynical like me, it's a good way to reaffirm your faith in humanity. And yeah, asking for help is often the first step towards connecting with people.
It's really, really nice. It reminds me a lot. It just makes me want to get back on the road, really. It's been great to chat to you. I'm going to bring it to a close. We can talk a bit afterwards. Maybe we might have you back on at some point. Tell some more stories. Seems like you've got like hundreds and hundreds. But thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having
Real
us.
pleasure.